Hello, this is Dr. Adam J. Bach. We're going to continue our conversation about what makes entrepreneurial opportunities attractive. Before we get too far into that, it's worth making an important point. I like to quote one of my friends, Jose Estabil, who launched multiple billion-dollar semiconductor technology products and is now helping to launch a variety of different kinds of small business ventures in the tech space, as well as accelerators and nonprofits. And Jose likes to say, make what you can sell. Don't just try to sell what you can make. And this is one of those rare lessons that's so obvious in hindsight, but until you've heard it said, you may never have thought of it. If you've come up with something and you think it's amazing and you just try to sell that, you're in for a real challenge. A better approach is to figure out what people will buy and then make lots of those. So I hope you'll consider taking this suggestion to heart as you think about what makes entrepreneurial opportunities attractive. So you might be asking then, what do you actually do? You've got this idea, you've looked at this problem, and you want to figure out whether it really has commercial potential or not. You want to understand whether it's attractive. So the two key questions you have to ask here are, is there customer demand? And if the answer is yes, can you generate profits from that? There are then two main approaches that we can use to try to answer these questions. One is predictive or forecasting. So what we're trying to do is use research to evaluate the context and the situation in order to make a pretty good prediction about whether or not we think this is going to work. The other approach, which is really a more recent approach in our understanding of how entrepreneurship works, is a learning-based approach or experimentation, where you conduct various tests and use the results to try to figure out and adjust to generate a better outcome. So we can combine these two key questions, customer demand and long-term profits, in our two frameworks, predictive versus learning, to generate a variety of different options. And while it's not that any one of these is definitively better than any of the others, we do want to recommend that as you do some of these, you think about how to use the alternatives. So yes, it's good to do market research, but it's also useful to make sure you're using a lean startup approach and testing assumptions if at all possible. So we're going to walk through some of these to try to explain them. You have other additional readings that'll help you understand some of these elements as well. And lean startup in particular is the subject of one of the later modules in the course. So we're going to touch on it now, but you'll address it in more detail later on as well. So we'll begin with thinking a little bit about market research. If you've taken marketing courses or you're familiar with the concept of marketing research, that's fantastic. But a very simple way to do market research is just to look at something like Google Trends. So that's what we're going to do. And if you've never used Google Trends before, then I strongly encourage you to take a look at it, because it's a very quick way of finding out what kinds of things are people asking Google about. And since Google is the dominant search system, if you can learn what things are more popular in terms of how they're being searched, you have some indication of whether an idea is interesting to the general population or not. So let's come up with a very simple example. We've decided what we want to do is start an Asian noodle restaurant. I don't know where we came up with this idea from, but it's genius, clearly. But we have a question to answer. Should we focus on ramen noodles, soba noodles, or pho noodles? So the assumption here is we could make any of these at very high quality, but for whatever reason, we have to specialize on one. And we'll be fine because there's no competition. So we're making all sorts of terrible assumptions here, but at least it's a starting point. We can address all of those other things later on. So a quick way to do that is to go to Google Trends, and I've provided the link here to you, which you can either click on or you can track down Google Trends yourself and enter them all in. And you're going to now begin working on a Canvas activity as well. So this is a good time to pause the presentation, pull up Canvas and the activity so that you can take a look at this and figure out and answer the questions. So pull up Google Trends by clicking on the link. It's also available in the Canvas activity if that's easier to access. And based on Google search results, which of these three, pho, ramen, or soba, appears to be the most attractive opportunity for launching an Asian noodle restaurant in the United States? So go ahead and take a look at that. Pause this here, and then when you're ready, bring this up again, and we'll be ready to go. Assuming you've done that, you might want to be a little more specific. After all, your restaurant isn't just in the United States. It's got to be somewhere more specific. What about Texas? What would happen if we wanted to take a look at this specifically in Texas? Well, the good news is that Google provides a way to take a look at that. Here is the link to explore the same question but across specific states, and this link is also provided in the Canvas activity. And you can click on Texas. I think you just hover over Texas in the map just below the main search result, and you can quickly see, are the results the same in Texas? And in fact, they're not quite the same in Texas. So take a moment to do this and to complete the Canvas activity, and then come back here when you're ready and we'll move on. So an alternate approach to this is to use a lean startup framework. And the lean startup framework is based on the idea that rather than do a lot of market research in detail, what we want to do is create a simple example of whatever it is that we want to offer and get that in front of customers as quickly as possible. It's predicated on this idea of build, measure, learn. And again, we'll talk about this more later on in the course. But the idea is that you build some example of your product or service, a prototype, or something, a simpler version of your idea. And then you get it in front of customers as quickly as possible, who then tell you, yes, we could use this, no, we don't like this, here are the pieces we do or don't like. And then you quickly either keep going. If it seems to be successful, you persevere, or you pivot to a newer idea that actually better addresses customer needs. So this is the framework, right? This is what we call the learning framework. It's predicated on the idea that you recognize and accept that your idea may or may not be correct. If you can't function with that, if you can't accept the possibility that your idea might not be right, you may be getting yourself into trouble right from the beginning. But you put your idea into a theory, a set of hypotheses or assumptions, and then you test it by creating an experiment. Try to make the experiment inexpensive but as real as possible. You want this to be quick and cheap to do something that gets your idea in front of potential customers so they can give you feedback on it. Then you measure what happens and make changes as necessary. So here's one visualization that I kind of like. Your initial vision is everything, right? We want all these beautiful kinds of donuts, every possible color and flavor and topping and so on and so forth. But in fact, what we're going to start with is what we call the minimum viable product. That is, it is the simplest version of whatever it is that our idea is about that customers might actually pay for. And in this case, it's pretty basic, right? Instead of all these great colors and flavors and toppings, it's just a glazed donut, right? But it's probably simple and cheap to make, and we could put it in front of customers pretty quickly and get their feedback. Does it taste good? Does it have the right texture? And so on. And then we can collect feedback. Well, what would make this donut better? And perhaps enough people say to us, what we'd really like on this donut is chocolate frosting and colored sprinkles. And then we can iterate to get to that outcome, which is what customers really want. It's important to recognize that part of the Lean Startup framework is that some amount of failure is normal. It's quite usual to discover that the attractive customer segment is smaller or slightly different than what you expected, or that the product needs to be altered to meet specific customer needs, perhaps because what the customer cares about is actually different than what you thought. This kind of learning allows your company to pivot, and it has to be done repeatedly, over and over and over again, to get to products and services that customers are really thrilled about. And just classic quotes from great innovators: failure is just a resting place, it's an opportunity to begin again. And Edison's comment, I haven't failed, I've just found 10,000 ways that won't work. All of which hopefully lead you towards something that actually will work. So, with that in mind, imagine again that we have decided now to open a faux restaurant, and we're going to, or this is our dream, is to open a faux restaurant, specifically say at the University of Texas in Austin. So I want you to go to Canvas, and I want you to try to come up with experiments or tests that you could run in order to see if customer demand really exists. Opening a restaurant is very expensive. It could cost as much as $250,000 or $500,000. That's a lot to invest if you're not really sure whether people will actually buy faux noodles. So what kinds of things could you do in order to put product in front of customers? We're not talking about doing an online survey, right? That's not a prototype. What we're talking about is coming up with a cheap, quick way to get some of your product in front of customers and to find out whether they're interested or not. So please pause the presentation now, take a crack at that in Canvas, and then come back when you're ready. A great example of a company that's figured out fascinating ways to sort of prototype at a fairly advanced stage is Tesla. Tesla effectively launches its products before they're ready. They have these events where you can, and then they have a online setup where you can pre-order the car and put a down payment down in order to reserve your vehicle. Sometimes these processes result in slightly unexpected results, such as the launch of the Cybertruck, where they ended up breaking one of the truck's windows. And they learned an important lesson. If you smash the side of the door first, that makes the window more fragile. And then it was damaged when they threw the softball at it, I think. But you'll notice that they didn't take that as a failure. That was a learning experience. Hey, we just learned something new. We shouldn't have done it this way. And Tesla has really built an entire business around this process of putting product ideas in front of customers even before the product is ready. So I hope that this has given you some information about thinking about attractive opportunities in the context of customer demand. In the final presentation, we're going to talk about it in the context of understanding what makes opportunities profitable or not.